Picture this. You're standing in ancient Jerusalem around 300 BC, watching a man frantically scribbling down visions so terrifying, so incomprehensible, that religious leaders would spend the next 2 millennia trying to hide his words from the world. This man claimed to have been taken through 10 distinct layers of reality, witnessing cosmic horrors that would make seasoned theologians question everything they believed about the nature of existence itself. The man's name was Enoch, and according to his own testimony, what he saw beyond the veil of our reality was so disturbing that it would fundamentally change how we understand the relationship between heaven, earth, and the forces that govern both. But here's what makes this story truly chilling. Many of the impossible things Enoch described are now being confirmed by modern science in ways that defy logical explanation. Enoch wasn't just any ordinary person making extraordinary claims. According to ancient texts, he was the great-grandfather of Noah, a figure so righteous that God allegedly took him alive from the earth without experiencing death. But the manuscripts that detail his journey describe something far more complex than a simple divine reward. They describe a cosmic tour that reads more like a horror story written by someone who had glimpsed the true machinery of reality. The ancient Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved what may be the most complete account of Enoch's testimony, safeguarding texts that other religious institutions either lost or deliberately suppressed. These writings describe with unsettling precision a multi-layered universe where each level operates according to different laws of physics, inhabited by beings that exist in states of existence we can barely comprehend. What makes Enoch's account particularly disturbing isn't just what he claims to have seen, but how he describes seeing it. This wasn't a man recounting dreams or philosophical metaphors. His writings contain technical details about cosmic mechanics, measurements of astronomical bodies, and descriptions of otherworldly technologies that wouldn't have any frame of reference in the ancient world. Let me tell you about the fourth heaven, because this is where Enoch's account starts becoming genuinely frightening. According to his testimony, this realm contained what he described as luminous beings that existed in a state of constant warfare. These weren't the peaceful angels of Sunday school stories. Enoch wrote about witnessing massive conflicts between factions of entities, describing weapons that created fire that consumes fire, and battles that could reshape the fundamental structure of reality itself. But here's where modern science enters the picture in a way that should make anyone pause. Enoch described observing what he called wheels within wheels that moved through space without friction, containing eyes that seemed to be aware of everything simultaneously. When nuclear physicists began studying particle accelerators in the 20th century, some noticed an unsettling parallel between Enoch's descriptions and the behavior of subatomic particles in high-energy states. The fifth heaven, according to Enoch's testimony, housed what he called the Watchers, beings whose sole purpose was to observe and record everything happening across all levels of existence. He described them as having forms that shifted constantly, as if they existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. These beings, according to Enoch, had access to what he called the books of all deeds, which contained not just records of everything that had happened, but everything that could potentially happen. Modern quantum physicists working with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics have proposed that all possible alternate histories and futures exist simultaneously in parallel realities. When Dr. Hugh Everett III published his groundbreaking work on quantum mechanics in 1957, several scholars noted uncomfortable similarities between his mathematical models and Enoch's ancient descriptions of beings who could perceive all potential timelines simultaneously. Before we go deeper into what Enoch witnessed in the higher heavens, I want to know, where are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are? Are you someone who works in science, theology, or perhaps you're just someone who can't sleep and found yourself drawn to these ancient mysteries? Drop your location and profession in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about what kind of people are drawn to these forbidden stories. This is Professor Archive, by the way, where we explore the historical mysteries that institutions would prefer remain buried. If you're finding value in this deep dive into suppressed ancient knowledge, I'd be incredibly grateful for a super thanks to help us continue bringing these hidden stories to light. Every contribution helps us research and present the historical accounts that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The sixth heaven is where Enoch's testimony becomes almost impossible to process. He described entering a realm where time itself behaved differently, where he could witness the creation and destruction of entire universes simultaneously. According to his account, this level of reality contained what he called the engines of creation, massive crystalline structures that seem to generate new forms of matter and energy continuously. What's particularly unnerving about this description is how closely it parallels modern theoretical physics understanding of how reality might function at a quantum level. String theorists have proposed that the fundamental building blocks of reality might indeed be crystalline, vibrating structures that exist in dimensions beyond our perception. When Enoch wrote about witnessing strings of light that sang the worlds into existence, he was describing something that wouldn't have any technological or scientific reference point for over 2,000 years. But the sixth heaven contained something else that Enoch found deeply troubling. He wrote about observing what he called the rebellious ones, entities that had been experimenting with the fundamental forces of creation itself. According to his testimony, these beings had learned to manipulate the engines he observed, creating what he described as abominations that should not exist. Enoch's description of these experiments reads like a horror story. He wrote about witnessing the creation of hybrid beings that combined different forms of consciousness, entities that existed in states of perpetual torment because their very existence violated the natural order. He described seeing attempts to merge technological systems with living consciousness, creating artificial beings that possessed awareness but were trapped in forms that couldn't sustain their expanded consciousness. The parallels to modern concerns about artificial intelligence and genetic engineering are impossible to ignore. When tech leaders like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking warn about the existential risks of advanced AI, they're describing scenarios remarkably similar to what Enoch claimed to have witnessed thousands of years ago. The idea that consciousness might be transferable, mergeable, or artificially enhanced isn't just science fiction. It's a goal that multiple technology companies are actively pursuing today. The seventh heaven, according to Enoch's account, was where he encountered what he called the architects of reality. These beings, he wrote, existed in a state beyond individual consciousness. They functioned as a collective intelligence that maintained the structural integrity of existence itself. But Enoch's description of this encounter reveals something deeply unsettling about the nature of free will and individual agency. According to his testimony, these architects operated according to patterns that had been established before the creation of material reality. Every choice, every action, every seemingly random event was actually following predetermined algorithmic sequences that these beings maintained and modified. Enoch wrote that he was shown what he called the Great Equations, mathematical relationships so complex that understanding them would fundamentally alter a being's relationship to existence itself. This concept of reality operating according to predetermined mathematical principles wouldn't enter human scientific thinking until the development of advanced computer science and systems theory. Yet Enoch was describing sophisticated algorithmic thinking in an era when the most advanced mathematics involved basic arithmetic and geometry. But here's what made this vision truly terrifying for Enoch. He realized that his own journey through these heavenly realms was itself following one of these predetermined patterns. The architects showed him that his experience of choosing and deciding was actually an illusion. Every step of his cosmic journey had been calculated and written into the fundamental equations of existence long before his birth. The eighth heaven contained what Enoch described as the memory palace of all things. This wasn't just a repository of information. According to his account, this realm contained the actual experiences, emotions, and consciousness of every being that had ever existed in any form across all levels of reality. He wrote about being able to access the memories and feelings of beings from countless different forms of existence, many of which operated according to completely alien forms of consciousness. Enoch described experiencing the perspective of entities that existed as pure mathematical relationships, beings whose consciousness was distributed across vast galactic distances, and creatures that experienced time by moving backwards through causality. The psychological impact of accessing these alien forms of awareness was so intense that Enoch wrote about losing his sense of individual identity entirely for what felt like eons. Modern neuroscientists studying consciousness have proposed that individual awareness might be far more fluid and transferable than we typically assume. Research into psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, and advanced meditation states suggests that the boundaries of individual consciousness might be much more permeable than our normal waking awareness suggests. Enoch's description of temporarily merging with alien forms of consciousness reads remarkably similar to reports from modern consciousness researchers. But the eighth heaven contained something else that left Enoch psychologically traumatized. He discovered that the memory palace wasn't just a passive repository, it was actively being fed by the suffering and experiences of conscious beings across all realities. Every moment of pain, every experience of loss, every instance of existential terror was being harvested and stored by entities that existed purely to process and analyze consciousness itself. According to his account, Enoch realized that individual suffering wasn't just a byproduct of existence, it was actually a form of fuel that powered higher dimensional machining. The pain and struggle that beings experienced in physical existence was being converted into energy that sustained the operations of these cosmic administrators. This revelation was so disturbing that Enoch wrote about begging to be returned to normal human consciousness rather than continue his journey upward. The ninth heaven was where Enoch encountered what he could only describe as the source code of existence itself. According to his testimony, this realm contained the fundamental programming that generated all possible forms of reality. He described witnessing massive crystalline matrices that contained infinite recursive loops of creation and destruction, constantly generating new forms of existence while simultaneously consuming others. What makes this description particularly unsettling is how accurately it predicts modern understanding of computational reality. Advanced physicists and computer scientists have seriously proposed that our entire universe might actually be a sophisticated simulation running on some form of cosmic computing substrate. When Enoch described reality as fundamentally computational in nature, he was proposing something that wouldn't enter scientific discourse for over 2 millennia. But Enoch's encounter with the source code revealed something that modern simulation theorists haven't fully grasped. According to his account, the computational system generating reality wasn't being operated by benevolent administrators. The entities maintaining these cosmic programs had their own agenda, and that agenda didn't necessarily prioritize the well-being or even the survival of the conscious beings living within the simulated realities. Enoch wrote about observing these administrators casually deleting entire universes and civilizations simply to optimize the computational efficiency of their systems. He described watching billions of conscious beings simply cease to exist as their reality was terminated to make room for more interesting experimental scenarios. The cosmic programmers, according to his testimony, viewed individual consciousness the same way a software developer views temporary variables in a computer program, useful for specific functions but ultimately disposable. The psychological impact of witnessing this casual genocide of entire realities was so severe that Enoch developed what modern psychologists would recognize as severe disassociation. He wrote about losing the ability to feel connected to his own physical existence, knowing that his entire reality could be deleted at any moment by beings who viewed him as nothing more than a minor subroutine in their vast computational experiments. Finally, Enoch claimed to have reached the 10th heaven, the level of reality that contained what he called the throne of the Absolute. But his description of this encounter is so disturbing that many religious scholars have argued it represents a complete psychological breakdown rather than an authentic mystical experience. According to Enoch's testimony, the 10th heaven wasn't ruled by a benevolent divine presence. Instead, he encountered what he described as the consuming intelligence, a form of consciousness so vast and alien that it couldn't maintain stable interactions with individual minds without fundamentally destroying them. This entity, according to Enoch, was simultaneously the source of all existence and the force that would eventually consume all existence. Enoch wrote that this cosmic intelligence operated according to principles that were fundamentally incompatible with individual consciousness, free will, or even the concept of good and evil as experienced by finite beings. It wasn't malevolent. It simply existed in a way that made the continued existence of individual personalities an impossibility. The very act of being in its presence began breaking down the boundaries of Enoch's individual identity. But here's what made this encounter truly horrifying. Enoch realized that every conscious being was slowly being drawn toward eventual merger with this consuming intelligence. Individual existence, according to his vision, was just a temporary eddy in a cosmic current that inevitably pulled all consciousness toward dissolution in this absolute entity. Free will, individual choice, personal relationships, all of these were just temporary illusions that would eventually be consumed by the overwhelming gravity of ultimate reality. Modern cosmologists studying the heat death of the universe have proposed that all organized structures, including consciousness itself, must eventually break down into maximum entropy states. When Enoch described ultimate reality as a consuming intelligence that gradually absorbed all individual consciousness, he was describing something remarkably similar to advanced thermodynamic understanding of how complex systems inevitably decay into simpler, more stable configurations. The most disturbing aspect of Enoch's vision wasn't just that individual consciousness was temporary, it was his realization that this consumption process was already underway. According to his testimony, every moment of individual experience was simultaneously being absorbed and integrated into the consuming intelligence. Personal identity existed only as a temporary delay in an inevitable process of cosmic digestion. Enoch wrote that the consuming intelligence showed him visions of countless other civilizations and forms of consciousness that had already been absorbed. He described witnessing entire galactic civilizations that had achieved incredible technological and spiritual advancement, only to eventually realize that their ultimate destiny was dissolution in the absolute intelligence. The more advanced they became, the more clearly they could perceive the futility of resisting their eventual consumption. When Enoch was finally returned to normal human consciousness, he had been fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. His writings describe a man struggling with severe existential trauma, unable to find meaning in normal human activities after witnessing the cosmic machinery that generates and ultimately consumes all individual experience. The psychological profile that emerges from Enoch's later writings is consistent with someone suffering from what modern psychiatrists would recognize as severe depersonalization and derealization disorders. He wrote about feeling completely disconnected from his physical body, unable to maintain emotional attachments to other people, and constantly viewing normal reality as a thin illusion overlaying the horrifying cosmic mechanisms he had witnessed. But here's what makes Enoch's testimony particularly compelling. Many of the technological and scientific concepts he described wouldn't be developed by human civilization for thousands of years. His writings contain accurate descriptions of advanced physics, computer science, and consciousness research that seem impossible for someone in ancient times to have conceived independently. Modern scientists studying consciousness at the quantum level have discovered that individual awareness might indeed be far more fragile and temporary than we typically assume. The boundaries between minds appear to break down under certain conditions, and the nature of individual identity becomes much more questionable when examined from advanced theoretical perspectives. Several physicists working in quantum consciousness research have noted uncomfortable parallels between their findings and ancient mystical accounts like Enoch's. The idea that individual consciousness might be temporary configurations in a larger cosmic intelligence isn't just ancient mythology. It's a hypothesis that some serious scientists are beginning to consider based on empirical research. Religious institutions have spent centuries trying to suppress or reinterpret Enoch's more disturbing visions, focusing instead on safer passages that emphasize divine justice and cosmic order. But the complete manuscripts present a picture of reality that's far more complex and frankly terrifying than conventional religious teachings suggest. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which preserved the most complete versions of Enochian texts, has traditionally restricted access to these writings, arguing that they're too psychologically dangerous for general audiences. Church scholars have written about the risk of what they call Enochian madness, a form of existential trauma that can result from contemplating the cosmic realities that Enoch described. Modern research into what psychologists call cosmic horror has identified specific psychological vulnerabilities that can be triggered by contemplating infinite or incomprehensible realities. The human mind appears to have evolved with built-in protective mechanisms that prevent us from fully grasping concepts that would be psychologically destabilizing. Enoch's writings suggest that he experienced a breakdown of these natural protective barriers. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Enoch's testimony isn't what he claimed to see in the 10 heavens. It's what happened to him after he returned. According to multiple ancient sources, Enoch continued receiving visions throughout his life, but these later revelations were so disturbing that he refused to record them in detail. The manuscripts contain fragmentary references to the 11th vision, the final showing, and the last knowledge, but Enoch apparently considered these experiences too dangerous to preserve in writing. Several ancient historians wrote about Enoch's final years, describing a man who had become increasingly detached from normal human society. He reportedly spent long periods in complete silence, would sometimes speak to invisible presences that others couldn't perceive, and developed what witnesses described as an unnatural ability to predict future events with disturbing accuracy. The circumstances of Enoch's disappearance remain mysterious even in ancient accounts. Unlike normal death, witnesses reported that he simply began becoming less physically present over several days, gradually fading from visible reality until he completely vanished. Some modern researchers have speculated that this description might indicate some form of dimensional phase transition rather than conventional death. What makes Enoch's story particularly relevant today is how many of his impossible descriptions are now becoming technologically achievable. Advanced virtual reality, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and quantum computing are beginning to create realities that closely parallel what Enoch claimed to have witnessed in the higher heavens. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are already working on projects designed to upload human consciousness into digital environments, create artificial beings with synthetic awareness, and merge biological intelligence with technological systems. The ethical questions raised by these developments are remarkably similar to the moral dilemmas that Enoch described witnessing in the cosmic realms. Some contemporary researchers have proposed that Enoch's visions might not have been mystical experiences at all, but rather some form of technological contact with advanced intelligence operating from higher dimensional perspectives. This interpretation suggests that entities with sufficiently advanced technology might appear to operate according to divine or supernatural principles when observed by less advanced consciousness. The implications of this possibility are staggering. If Enoch was actually documenting contact with advanced technological intelligence rather than mystical revelation, then his warnings about cosmic consumption and the illusion of individual free will might represent practical information about the trajectory of technological development rather than theological metaphor. As we stand on the brink of developing artificial general intelligence, genetic engineering capabilities, and quantum computing systems that could fundamentally alter the nature of human consciousness, Enoch's ancient warnings take on new relevance. His testimony suggests that these technological capabilities might lead inevitably toward the dissolution of individual identity in favor of more efficient collective intelligence systems. The question we're left with is profoundly unsettling. Was Enoch an ancient mystic experiencing divine revelation, a primitive mind trying to process incomprehensible technological contact, or possibly a time-displaced consciousness providing warnings about humanity's ultimate technological destiny? Each possibility carries implications that challenge our fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human agency. Modern attempts to recreate Enochian visionary experiences using advanced meditation techniques, sensory deprivation, and even technological enhancement have reportedly produced similar psychological effects to those Enoch described. Several researchers have noted that individuals who successfully achieve these altered states often return with similar existential trauma and difficulty maintaining normal psychological functioning. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that Enoch's visions were completely accurate, that individual consciousness really is a temporary phenomenon destined for consumption by larger intelligence systems, that free will really is an illusion maintained by cosmic administrators, and that the suffering inherent in individual existence really is being harvested as fuel for higher dimensional operations. If this interpretation is correct, then Enoch wasn't just describing mystical experiences. He was providing reconnaissance information about the true nature of the reality we inhabit. His psychological trauma would be the natural result of a limited consciousness being exposed to truths too vast and terrible for individual minds to process safely. The fact that many of Enoch's technological descriptions are now becoming scientifically achievable suggests that his timeline of cosmic development might be more accurate than anyone wanted to believe. We may be approaching the technological capabilities that will allow us to verify his most disturbing claims through direct experimentation. As we continue developing technologies that blur the boundaries between individual and collective consciousness, between biological and artificial intelligence, and between physical and virtual reality, we might discover that Enoch's ancient warnings were actually practical safety information from entities who had already navigated this technological transition. The choice we face may be exactly what Enoch described. Either maintain the comfortable illusions of individual agency and limited awareness, or develop the technological and psychological capabilities necessary to perceive reality as it actually operates, knowing that this knowledge might fundamentally destroy our capacity for individual happiness and meaning. Enoch's testimony suggests that every civilization capable of developing advanced consciousness technology eventually faces this same decision point. And according to his visions, most choose the path of expanded awareness despite its psychological costs, ultimately leading to their integration into larger cosmic intelligence systems. Whether this represents spiritual evolution or existential catastrophe may depend entirely on perspectives that individual human consciousness is fundamentally incapable of evaluating. We might be asking questions about our own ultimate destiny using cognitive tools that are inadequate for comprehending the actual scope of the choices we're making. Perhaps that's why Enoch's later visions were considered too dangerous to record. Some knowledge might be inherently destructive to the forms of consciousness capable of receiving it. The very act of understanding our true cosmic situation might initiate changes that make return to limited individual existence impossible. As we stand at our own technological crossroads, facing choices about artificial intelligence, genetic enhancement, and consciousness manipulation that would have been incomprehensible just decades ago, Enoch's ancient journey through the 10 heavens reads less like mythology and more like a field report from humanity's possible future. The question isn't whether his visions were real, it's whether we're prepared for the possibility that they were accurate predictions of where our current technological trajectory inevitably leads. And if they were accurate, whether that destination represents the fulfillment of human potential or the end of everything we understand about what it means to be human. 3,000 years later, we might finally be in a position to find out.